Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 3rd of March, 2023. Jummah Mubarak, and I hope everybody has had a great week and looking forward to the weekend. Today, I would like to read to you from this wonderful little book of Mawlana Shaykh Nazim, Mercy Oceans. It's some of Mawlana Shaykh Nazim's early Sohbets, early talks, and these were recorded in 1980, and the book was published in 1980, so there might even have been slightly before that, maybe in 1979 or something. But the book was published in 1980, and I'm going to read from page 148. Islam is dynamic, not passive. Our Grand Sheikh, that Sheikh Abdullah Fayez Dagestani, is speaking about two attributes which belong to the prophets, peace be upon them: to have himmah, high aspirations, and to be dynamic, never lazy. This is the inheritance of the prophets. They are light for action. They are light for action, not heavy, because their spirit belongs to the heavens. They are light for action. In other words, if you're weighed down, then you can't move around. It's light, like what's his name, the boxer Muhammad Ali. How he used to be on the stage and he was dancing around, and he was light as a feather. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim here is describing the prophets as being of that kind of nature, that they were light, they were able to move around, they weren't heavy. And Shaykh Nazim said this is because their spirit belongs to heavens. Laziness is the inheritance of Satan. You can't find any prophet sitting and enjoying this world or asking for rest. They are like rivers, running always, running until reaching the ocean. Every saint was dynamic. As much as a person is having faith, so much as is he active. No action, no faith. There are 500 goodnesses from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad Salam. The Quran says, when you are relieved, still toil. Finishing one's action, you jump to another. It is the best direction for people to follow, to be active in every situation. There is no laziness in any religion. Some people, even Muslims, say Islam makes people passive. And there's the saying, religion is the opiate for the masses. They are liars, ignorant. They learned something of Western knowledge and say this. I am sorry for them. Arabs were sleeping before Islam and slaves to Rome and Persia. After the coming of Islam, they conquered from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. So let's just unpack here. Some tea, just a minute. This Indonesian green bottle tea is really, really nice. I was given some when I was in Indonesia recently, and I've been drinking it every day. I was drinking it while I was over there. It's strange because I've got green tea from China, but the green tea from Indonesia, it's so much nicer. I don't normally drink green tea, but I love this stuff. Anyway, back to this. So Mawlana Shaykh Nazim here is saying that none of the prophets were lazy, that they had himmah, high aspirations, and they were dynamic. They were always active. They were doing stuff. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim is saying laziness is something that comes from the devil or from shaitan, implying also it's come from the human ego as well. It's not from the spirit. And that the prophets and the saints, when they finished one action, they carried on and did another action. And this is coming from the Quran, that even when you finish your work, you still toil. You still work. You work on something else. And if you look even at people in dunya, even people who are not Muslims, the successful people in this world, take someone like Steve Jobs, for instance. He never stopped. He was always working. Even you look at Bill Gates, again, he never stops. He's finished with Microsoft. Now he's, working on developing toilet projects, vaccines, whatever. And whatever you think of any of those things, the man never stops. He keeps working. And this is what has made him successful in this world. But Mawlana Shaykh Nazim is saying that this is something which Islam teaches. This is something which all of the religions teach. It's something which the prophets teach. But this is something which, if you have this attitude, it will lead to success in both worlds. It will lead to success, depending on what you're working on. Obviously, if you're working hard on bad things, that's different. But if you're working hard for your business, then obviously you're going to get success in that, hopefully, eventually, even if you don't see it straight away, if you keep picking yourself up and carrying on going. Istiqamah, whether you have istiqamah in your business or whether you have istiqamah in religion, is going to lead to success in whatever you're doing. But if you're lazy, if you're not doing anything, if you sit back, well, nothing's going to happen, is it? So you can't blame anybody for nothing happening because you're not doing anything. And so Mawlana Shaykh Nazim is saying, as much as a person has faith, they will be active. In other words, the more faith a person has, the more active that they will be. Mawlana Shaykh Nazim quotes a point here as well and said that the Arabs were sleeping before Islam. And because of this, they become slaves to the Romans and they become slaves to the Persians. Now, this is historically is true. The lands which are now places like Saudi Arabia and Yemen and stuff, the Arab lands, before Islam, this was just a backwater. Nobody was interested in that. There was a few little trade routes that passed through it, but it was a borderland between the Persians and the Romans. These were the two empires that warred amongst each other. No one was expecting that suddenly the Arabs would rise up and make an empire or even make anything of themselves because they were sleeping, metaphorically speaking. In other words, they were not active in anything constructive. They were not working hard on developing their society, their civilization up until that point. When Islam came, everything changed. And the legacy of the Arabs, it runs right from Spain to India. And this is something quite incredible. Even in countries which no Arab army ever set foot in, like Indonesia, people learn Arabic. People have benefited from that Muslim civilization that developed. This shows the power of Islam. And it shows that Islam is not a religion of laziness. It's a religion of working hard. If people didn't work on this, this wouldn't be the case. Our Grand Sheikh was saying, this is Sheikh Abdullah al-Faiz al-Dagestani, this is going back to 1980. He said, "Oh, my son, every active person will enter paradise and every lazy person, hell. Even one active for dunya enjoyments, his activeness will lead to good in the end. Like wild waters from the mountains coming down to the plains and giving benefit. For going against the ego, one must be dynamic. That's an interesting point. Wild waters. It's like Sheikh Abdullah Faiz Dagestani was talking about flood waters coming down from the mountains. It's destructive. But even though it's destructive, in the process, it clears the way. And through clearing the way, maybe, you know, whatever trees or whatever it knocks out the way, eventually it opens up that land for new uses. Maybe it brings things down from the mountain which fertilize the soil. Also like a volcano, when a volcano erupts. And yes, it makes a lot of destruction. That lava comes down the volcano. But, you know, as in places like Java, as you know, in parts of Italy as well, where the volcanoes erupt, they leave behind fertile soil. That ash makes fertile soil. So even though it destroys everything in its path, afterwards, it creates fertility. And the best agricultural products come from these regions. You know, the best coffee, the best tea, the best wheat for making pasta from Italy. For going against the ego, one must be dynamic. A man climbing a mountain must have energy, but one coming down is not needing to be so dynamic. For people sitting in a pub from midday to midnight, you cannot say they are dynamic, they are lazy. One doing serious work and leaving after him things all people can benefit from, that man has inheritance from the Prophet Muhammad SAW. One doing serious work and leaving after him things that all people can benefit from, that man has inheritance from the Prophet Muhammad SAW. It's words of Sheikh Abdullah Faiz Dagestani, and it's true if you think about it. And even if those things are things which people benefit from in a material sense in this world, or whether they're things that are educational and spiritual. Bismillah. Who sleeps too much is lazy. More than 8 hours for adults is harming bodies. It is like not sleeping enough. The body becomes tired. For some people, the divine presence is taking them. They never sleep. Like one Murid in Bursa, Sunnatiji Tassin. He was ordered by Sheikh Sharifuddin to clean the platter after a feast. There was enough food left for 20 people, but he ate it all, wiping the plate with his finger and licking. That night, Sheikh Sharifuddin told our Grand Sheikh to look after Tassin Effendi. He went into his chamber and stood unmoving, lost in his Lord, until 1 hour before dawn. Then he began to pray Tahajjud. At the call for Fajr, he went to the mosque, prayed, and sat afterwards in zikr until sunrise. Then he prayed Ishraq and took his axe and went on to his work. If a man wants to obtain that power of not needing to sleep, and he intends not to sleep for the sake of Allah, to make his Lord pleased, then he must go do 40 days practice. This means any time feeling sleepy, quickly going for wudu and praying 2 rakats over and over. If he has patience for 40 days, he will have heavenly powers like angels, never again sleeping. Awliya, if they are like this, it is because they have been ordered with permission of the Prophet. So this is not for normal people. It's a very important point that sometimes, you know, you get individuals that they have a particular mission in life, something that is meant for them. This is for that. But it's not something, you know, if you or I tried to do that, we would become ill. because we are not meant to. We are meant to have our nightly sleep. But a nightly sleep is, as Mawlana Shaykh Nazim here mentions, 8 hours is enough. And more than 8 hours for adults is harming bodies. This is proven today by, I don't know if it was in 1980 when Shaykh Nazim said this, but it's certainly proven by medical science today. If you sleep too much, you will harm yourself. If you sleep for between 6 and 8 hours an evening, you'll be absolutely fine. Obviously, also, most people, unless they are one of these special Awliya Allah who can do without sleep, most people, if they don't sleep enough, they will also injure themselves. So it's important to have a balance with sleep. But a balance is not oversleeping. And many people today are oversleep and sleep more than 8 hours. And then they wonder why they feel lazy, they've got no energy. If you sleep more than 8 hours, and I tried this myself in the past, you know, if you sleep more than 8 hours, you will make yourself feel like you haven't slept. It's really not good for us. Today, not most days, I normally sleep between 4 and 6 hours, and that's plenty for me. 8 hours is the recommended amount by doctors for most people. People think plenty of food makes the body strong, and therefore eat too much. A man saying, "I'm full up with my dinner," is a big sinner in the divine presence. Allah is making you full up, not that food. He can fill you with one piece of food. He can fill you with one piece of food. Our Grand Sheikh says that when the Dajjal comes, all Muslims will find protection in Sham. Sheikh Mu'ainuddin said that so many people will come that the city will be as big as the other side of the mountain as it is now on this side. There will be no place to put feet on the ground. Perhaps 50 million people. How can they all eat and drink? Abu Bakr asked this, the takbir of the Mahdi will give all believers divine powers. One morsel of food will be enough for 40 days. And this is nothing as well. I mean, if you compare what some people eat in this world who are not so well off, as more well-off people either within developing countries, the more well-off people, or within developed countries. And you look instead at the people who are not so well-off in developing countries and what they manage to survive on. Some of them even thrive on. Now, I'm not recommending that we live like that, but at the same time, when you see this, it makes you think, because how much do we eat? How much do we have available to us, and all the luxury food that we will eat here in the West? And then you go to someone who is in some poor shanty town somewhere and see what they live on, what they eat. And some of them are quite healthy on what is very basic, simple food, and there's not much. So we really don't need to be eating so much food. And if we realize this, then, you know, one, we can reduce what we eat, which will improve our health. I mean, what is dieting after all? But also it will save us money, and hopefully we can put that to some better use. Eating too much can actually also make us ill, and it can also make us very lazy. Shaykh Nazim said, people also think that sleeping a lot gives rest. No, Allah gives rest. Maybe with 5 hours of sleep, a person gets no rest. Well, with 5 minutes of sleep, another gets plenty of rest. The best sleeping is early after Isha until 1 hour before dawn. Early sleeping is best. And dirty medical science says this now as well. You know, an hour before midnight is worth 2 after. Early sleeping is best. 4 hours right after Isha before midnight are like 8 hours at any other time. This enables one to increase his devotions and useful activities. Now, all people occupy that time with useless meetings, nonsense speakings, and watching television. Maybe nowadays it's people just sitting through and watching TikTok videos and TikTok videos and YouTube shorts and things. And, you know, it's time wasted. This is one real reason for illness. The second best sleeping is between sunrise and noon. And afternoon until mid-afternoon is the third best. Sleep is no good between dawn and sunrise. And between mid-afternoon and sunset is the worst. The Prophet ﷺ says that if a bad thing comes to a man while he is sleeping in that time, he cannot blame anyone but himself. For more than 8 hours sleep, you must say to yourself, I am lazy. Oh, dear. About non-Muslim ancestors. On the Judgment Day, Allah will give inspirations to the hearts of all people. Anyone who did goodness in their lives, don't be sorrowful about this. The Prophet ﷺ says that any non-Muslims doing something beneficial for a Muslim must come to real faith in the end. This is the time of Muhammad ﷺ and his nation. No more nation of Moses or Jesus, finished. All of your ancestors will be rescued from, it means in terms of time, because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there is this belief among Muslims that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the prophet of this time, since he was like a prophet. Whereas before that, since Jesus was the time of when he was a prophet and his mission, until the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was his time. So it's a generational thing that is being referred to here. We're no longer living in the time of Moses or the time of Jesus. It doesn't mean that they, whatever they brought is anything wrong with it. Sometimes the way things are worded can confuse, but that's what it means. All of your ancestors will be rescued from hell or pass right by it because of the fountains of faith coming from you, like oil wells giving wealth to once poor nations. Your ancestors lived in non-Muslim countries and didn't know any better than what was available to them. Perhaps some intrinsic goodness in their hearts led them to do the best that they could do in their surroundings, and thus deserve having Muslim descendants. The Prophet ﷺ says that a good son prays, makes dua for his father and his ancestors. That means all ancestors. It's not just because every Muslim on this earth has ancestors who weren't Muslims. And they will be praying for their ancestors, unless there's something wrong with them. I mean, who doesn't pray for their ancestors? But traditionally, all Muslims pray for their ancestors. And that means all Muslims are praying for ancestors who weren't Muslims. Shaykh Nazim says, no one will be punished for what they didn't fully know. But if a person didn't know something, Allah is not going to hold them to account for them. And this is also why you should respect all people. And even in this time, there are many people, they don't know what is the real Islam, because what they've been told is a pack of lies, or they've seen examples of Muslims who are not good people. Well, if that's all people know, then they're not going to be interested in Islam, are they? And they might even be rewarded by Allah for keeping away from it because of what they think it is. And maybe those Muslims they're keeping away from are really bad people. But if they're good people, if they're doing good things themselves, and they're doing the best they can according to what they understand, Allah will give them their reward for that. And unlike what some people think, that reward is not necessarily just a worldly reward. It can also be a reward in the hereafter. Otherwise, Allah is not just. And we know to be just, the just is one of Allah's names. So, and Allah is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and Al-Ghafar and Al-Ghafur, Al-Kareem, the most compassionate, the most kind, the forgiving, the most forgiving, generous. These divine names would be a lie if they were not realized. If Allah cannot be called the just, if Allah doesn't do justice, and justice means that Allah treats everyone fairly. And so Allah is not going to judge someone for what they didn't know, what they couldn't necessarily have known or couldn't have known easily, or had, no inclination that something was right because everything that they saw indicated the opposite. Allah will hold them to account for what they understood and how they lived. It's not about the label, it's about the reality. And I know plenty of people who, if you ask them, would say that they are Jews, Christians, even Buddhists and Hindus. And if you ask them questions about the nature of God, about the nature of reality, about how we should live, that they will give you answers that are sometimes the same or very close to the answers that a Muslim would give, a Muslim who really understands their religion. Well, if that's what they understand and that's what they believe, it doesn't matter whether they are a Jew, a Christian, a Hindu, because there's something about them that they have that reality, the understanding of the reality, the understanding of what is true, the understanding of what is right. And if their actions also accord with that, why would Allah hold it against them that they do not take a label as Muslim? If their actual beliefs and how they live are more in accordance with it than many Muslims today. And if that's how they are, and they see Muslims that are very different, then of course they're going to keep away from that group of Muslims. And this is also why it's important for us as Muslims that we must do our best to live according to the teaching of Islam. Because if we're not living up to the example that the Prophet Muhammad SAW gave us, we're not living up to, and showing that kindness, compassion, love for other human beings, and even for the animals and even the trees the Prophet Muhammad SAW showed. We won't have it to the same degree the Prophet Muhammad SAW, but if we're not got something along those lines that we are living by, one has to ask, how much Islam is actually in us at all. So it's very important that we do our best instead of pointing fingers at others, because otherwise, if other people are keeping away from us because we're not living up to Islam, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question us on a day of judgment. Why did you show them the wrong way and call yourselves Muslims? We will be held to account for them. Thank you for joining us for today's Friday Reflections. I look forward to seeing you on Monday for my Sufi meditation. And if you are in Birmingham, you're most welcome to join me in person at the University of Birmingham's Multi-Faith Chaplaincy. Wish you all the very best. Have a wonderful weekend. If you're in the UK, have a very good evening. And wherever you are, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.